I always say that I never sang any style of music that I hadn't heard in my household growing up. I can't approach it with any kind of authenticity.
She was the voice that could silence a stadium, the queen of genre-bending brilliance. But behind the spotlight, Linda Ronstadt carried scars no song could heal. Betrayals, humiliations, and backstage clashes followed her throughout her career. And today, we're looking at 7 musicians who left lasting wounds on her journey. Don Henley and the Eagles. Before they were legends, Don Henley and Glenn Frey were just 2 struggling musicians trying to make it in Los Angeles. Everything changed when Linda Ronstadt invited them to join her as part of her backing band in 1971. Henley was on drums, Frey on guitar, joined by Randy Meisner and Bernie Laden. That tour became the seed that grew into one of the biggest rock bands in history, the Eagles. Linda didn't just give them jobs, she gave them credibility, exposure, and a stage where powerful industry insiders were watching. By the end of the tour, Henley and Frey decided to form their own group, and Ronstadt fully supported them. She even recommended them to record executives. Within 2 years, the Eagles were topping charts with Take It Easy, and later cementing their legacy with Hotel California. But fame twisted the bond. Henley's attitude toward Linda shifted. In interviews, he dismissed her music as safe and too polished. For someone who had opened the door for him, those words cut deep. The real fracture came off stage. Linda discovered Henley had been using her name to gain access to venues and events she wasn't part of. He was cashing in on her reputation without her consent. Quietly but firmly, she revoked his backstage credentials. From that moment, Don Henley was no longer welcome at her shows. What Henley never acknowledged is that the Eagles' foundation, their stage discipline, their layered harmonies, even their vocal style, was shaped while touring with Ronstadt. Glenn Frey later admitted they learned the power of harmony from watching her record, but Henley never gave her that credit. Instead, he distanced the Eagles from their early roots, erasing her influence. For Linda, that silence was its own betrayal. After the fallout, they rarely crossed paths again. Ronstadt pushed boundaries with opera, mariachi, and big band. Henley stuck to rock and launched a solo career. Both reached superstardom, but the bond that once connected them was buried and left unspoken. Jim Morrison. If Henley's betrayal was quiet, Morrison's was loud, chaotic, and unforgettable. In 1968, Linda was rising fast with her band The Stone Ponies and their hit Different Drum. That same year, she crossed paths with Jim Morrison of The Doors, already infamous for his unpredictable and reckless stage presence. During one of her shows, Morrison stormed on stage without warning. In front of thousands, he grabbed Linda and tried to kiss her mid-performance. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some laughing. Linda froze in shock. What should have been her moment was stolen and turned into a spectacle. This wasn't just bad behavior. Morrison was deep into alcohol and drugs, and his antics were becoming legendary for all the wrong reasons. But humiliating Ronstadt in public left a scar that went deeper than his usual chaos. She didn't lash out backstage. She was known for composure. But those close to her said the incident shook her. From then on, she avoided Morrison and made sure never to perform near him again. And as shocking as that was, it was only one of many betrayals that shaped Ronstadt's career. Jim Morrison. If the onstage stunt wasn't bad enough, Morrison found a way to humiliate Linda again. Just weeks later, during a radio interview, he mocked her in front of a national audience. He called her sweet but spineless and claimed her music lacked fire. Coming from someone with Morrison's fame, those words spread quickly, and they stung. Linda never fired back publicly. That wasn't her style. Instead, she let her work speak for her. building her catalog and strengthening her reputation one show at a time. But those close to her noticed the change. From that moment on, she became sharper about protecting her boundaries. She carefully chose who she would share the stage with, avoiding artists with a reputation for reckless behavior. Here's the twist most people miss. Industry insiders actually respected how she handled the humiliation. She didn't seek headlines. She didn't create drama. She quietly distanced herself and focused on the long game. Managers and producers began to see her as more than just another young singer. She was a professional with staying power. In a selfish, cutthroat business, that set her apart. Meanwhile, Morrison spiraled further. His drinking and drug use worsened. His performances grew more erratic. And within just 3 years, he was gone at 27. He left behind a mythic legacy, but also a trail of damage, including the scars he left on Linda Ronstadt's career. For Linda, though, that chapter became a turning point. She didn't crumble under his insults. She grew stronger. Morrison burned out fast, while Ronstadt went on to build a career that lasted decades. Neil Young. If Morrison's betrayal was loud, Neil Young's was quiet, but it cut just as deep. It was 1976, the peak of Linda Ronstadt's fame. Her albums were selling in the millions, and she had become the lone woman dominating a rock scene full of men. At the same time, Neil Young was at his creative height, celebrated for his folk rock anthems and political edge. On paper, they looked like natural allies. That year, both were invited to perform at a benefit concert for farm workers' rights, a cause Linda passionately supported. The lineup was star-studded, and the mix of voices seemed powerful. But behind the scenes, things took a sharp turn. Neil had a very specific vision of what protest music should sound like. Raw, urgent, stripped of polish. Linda, with her soaring voice and clean production style, didn't fit his image. During rehearsals, Young dismissed her input outright. He brushed off her suggestions, told people her sound was too commercial and too clean for a protest stage. For Ronstadt, who was known for her relentless work ethic and respect for other artists, it was more than insulting. She hadn't come to prove herself. She came to support a cause. Yet in front of her peers, Neil made her feel out of place. She left the concert disappointed, but true to her nature, she stayed professional. She didn't lash out, didn't create a scene. But for her, the night left a lasting sting. Neil Young and Linda Ronstadt would never share a stage again. The fallout from that 1976 benefit concert never made headlines, but those in the industry noticed. Linda quietly distanced herself from Neil Young and stopped accepting projects where his influence might linger. She never attacked him publicly, but years later, she hinted that male artists often questioned her sincerity in ways they never questioned each other. For Linda, that night was a turning point. She became more selective about the causes she supported, choosing to back activism behind the scenes rather than risk humiliation on stage again. What looked like a minor clash to outsiders shaped the way she navigated the second half of her career. While Neil carried on writing raw protest anthems, Linda chose a different path, polished, powerful, and widely heard. They had the same goals, but their approaches clashed, and the cost was respect. Frank Zappa. If Neil Young dismissed her in private, Frank Zappa humiliated her in public. In 1974, Linda stepped into Zappa's studio, hoping to push her boundaries with his experimental style. On paper, it sounded exciting, her voice, his bold ideas. But from the first session, Zappa treated it less like collaboration and more like a test. When Linda offered suggestions, he mocked her in front of the band, laughing at her tone and implying she couldn't handle serious music. By then, she was already a platinum-selling star with a world-class voice. But in Zappa's world, none of that mattered. She walked out before the session ended, and they never worked together again. The tapes were shelved, forgotten. Behind closed doors, Zappa reportedly used the incident to claim pop singers weren't fit for complex music. But the truth was simpler. Collaboration requires respect, and Zappa had none to give. For Linda, the sting of that night became a lesson. From then on, she took greater control of her own recording sessions, running them with openness and professionalism, the exact opposite of what she'd endured with Zappa. Walking away from Zappa didn't slow Linda down. Within a few years, she was branching into big band, mariachi, and country rock, all on her own terms. That failed session gave her clarity. She didn't need to fit into anyone else's world. She was already building one of her own. David Crosby. Then came David Crosby. In the mid-70s, he and Linda shared the Laurel Canyon scene. Jam sessions, collaborations, late-night rehearsals. But in 1975, a small rehearsal disagreement spiraled. Crosby wanted a key change. Linda declined, protecting her voice. Weeks later, in Rolling Stone, Crosby went for the jugular, dismissing her as manufactured. The insult cut deep, not just because of the words, but because it came from a friend. Linda drew a boundary. She cut him out, even pulling from a planned studio project that later became a hit without her. Meanwhile, Crosby's remark earned him backlash. His struggles with addiction and his reputation for being difficult only fueled the criticism. Linda never fired back. Instead, she doubled down on growth, classical, Latin, and cross-genre projects that proved her artistry was real. Crosby later hinted at regret, but by then the damage was permanent. Their split wasn't just personal, it marked a shift in music. Crosby clung to the purity myth, while Linda built a sustainable, evolving career. Elvis Costello. And then came the punk rebellion. In 1979, after a Powerhouse Festival set, Elvis Costello mocked her performance to reporters, sneering that it sounded like background music for brunch. Linda confronted him backstage, and he doubled down. No apology, just another insult. For Linda, it wasn't the first jab she'd endured, but it was one of the most disrespectful. And it came from a fellow performer at the same event. She chose silence. No feud, no rebuttal. Instead, she pivoted, recording a traditional Mexican album that proved her vision didn't need validation from anyone. Critics praised it, and her audience grew even bigger. Costello later blamed his immaturity, but the reputation stuck. Linda, on the other hand, showed that silence and professionalism could echo louder than a comeback. Linda didn't need a comeback. While Costello's insult clung to his reputation, she simply moved forward. For Linda, grace was louder than any cheap shot. Paul Simon. Then came Paul Simon. In 1982, fans dreamed of a legendary pairing. Simon's lyrical genius with Linda's once-in-a-generation voice. It should have been magic. Instead, it was chaos. From the moment they entered the studio, Simon's perfectionism clashed with Linda's free spirit. Every idea she offered was dismissed. Every suggestion shot down. The atmosphere turned icy, as if she wasn't a collaborator, but just a guest in her own session. Linda had worked with geniuses before, from Nelson Riddle to Dolly Parton. She knew the difference between high standards and control. With Simon, it wasn't about making the song better. It was about power. She tried to push through, but the tension became unbearable. Finally, Linda walked out. The song was abandoned. Fans never heard it, and the dream duet vanished into rock and roll what-ifs. But Linda didn't view it as a loss. To her, it was a lesson. Respect mattered more than opportunity. Fame meant nothing if it cost her voice, her vision, her dignity. Simon's reputation as a difficult collaborator followed him. Linda's legacy only grew. She kept proving that true artistry wasn't just about talent. It was about integrity, freedom, and knowing when to step away. The Ronstadt-Simon duet may never exist, but maybe that's the point. Some songs aren't meant to be sung, because the silence speaks louder. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And check out the next video on your screen for more untold stories from the world of music.